in this current era of beloved adventure and sci-fi fantasy franchises committing suicide, I thought I'd look at two of them to determine which was worse. So the two franchises I'll be looking at will be Doctor Who and Star Trek Discovery. One of the worst sins a franchise can do is destroy its continuity, either by ignoring established character traits or by rebooting a franchise to the point of being unrecognizable. Continuity is the foundation of a given series, and ignoring it due to laziness can be harmful and even devastating to the series overall. This is because when this happens, it insults the viewer's investment in a narrative that suddenly doesn't respect itself, let alone its audience. So we'll start with Doctor Who. Doctor Who just finished its 11th season or series that introduced the first female version of the Doctor. It was easily the worst season ever produced for Doctor Who. It was dragged down by PC sermons and, even worse, lazy plots utterly bereft of passion for the show and its lore. You'd think, with all the hype of the first female Doctor being introduced and all that, the producers would provide her with exciting and intriguing plots and story ideas. Well, they didn't. No, they really didn't. That being said, did Doctor Who Season 11 destroy its continuity? Well, Doctor Who's continuity is often a bit hazy. There are elements that aren't resolved, and in some cases, probably for the better. New Who didn't really trample too much on Classic Who, and at times relied on the Time War to sort of excuse any inconsistencies. With its own continuity, it tended to ignore it or forget it. An example here would be when the Master returned in New Who, the Doctor mentions, this is when, in the 10th Doctor, Derek Jacobi was the Master, and then he becomes John Sim, the Doctor says he'll recognize the Master in his newly regenerated body despite not having seen it yet, because he says, the Time Lord always knows. This actually calls back to the classic series. You can go all the way back to the War Games with the second Doctor, with Patrick Troughton. The Doctor instantly recognizes the character of the War Chief as a Time Lord. Now, how did this happen? Well, who knows? I guess you could suggest that some latent telepathy between them, perhaps. I say this because when the 10th Doctor first meets the Master in his Professor Yana guise, when it was played by Derek Jacobi, he doesn't recognize him because the Master's true consciousness is locked away. So you can kind of, say, oh, well, there you go. That's why I didn't recognize him. And then he does later. But anyway, the concept is established here and fully spelled out by the 10th Doctor himself. So when the Master became Missy, the Doctor does not initially recognize her. Well, what the hell, she has to flat out just tell him who she is. This deviates from the established continuity that New Who set up itself. Granted, it, like I said, it pays tribute to Classic Who, but also within its own continuity, within a few seasons here, they've already forgotten it to introduce Missy and to make it more spectacular and all that. Because the Doctor's, he's shocked that the Master is now a woman, which also calls into question of the current continuity addition that New Who has introduced, the Time Lord ability of gender swapping. And this calls into question whether or not this is a common occurrence. So this is an example of laziness with continuity, but it's not totally destructive. The gender swapping is not damaging the continuity because even though this was not established in Classic Who, it was also not established that gender swapping couldn't happen. So, and by established, I mean on screen within the narrative. People refer to this business of Sidney Newman suggesting a female Doctor, which was in an effort to drum up interest in the series to save it from cancellation in the 80s. I mean, that just doesn't count. Time Lord gender swapping within the continuity and its narrative begins with New Who. So just talking about it in interviews and whatnot is not the same thing as actually demonstrating it within the series, whether it's the Doctor or some other Time Lord. Some could take clues from Doctor Who so far that gender swapping is rare. The Time Lord General and hell-bent, regenerates and says she's back to normal after having been a man. This suggests that her primary identity is female and has only been a man once. This was probably done somewhat unwittingly and only so she could utter a sexist line about male ego. But nevertheless, they're demonstrating things here that fits in with its continuity about this business of gender swapping. And so they should follow that, but will they? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But now there have been rumors that Doctor Who might reveal that the Doctor was originally female, thereby making all the previous male versions aberrations. Fortunately, this didn't happen in season 11. There were some lines by the Doctor suggesting she might have been a woman before, but nothing fully substantial. If they do this, yes, it would be destructive to continuity. Well, what do you mean? Well, Twice Upon a Time, which is Capaldi's last episode, which actually introduced Jodie Whittaker's Doctor at the end, clearly states that when the first Doctor regenerated into the second Doctor, it was the first time he had ever done it. I don't care what name he had before, this was the first time this entity that now calls itself the Doctor regenerated. And it was pivotal for the plot of that show because he was scared to do it. So the only reason to change it at this point, you have to conclude, would be more misandry. It's not enough to change the Doctor into a woman. You have to wipe out the previous male incarnations as aberrations. Fortunately, they haven't done this yet. Doctor Who continuity may be bruised and battered, but it's not destroyed. Yes. So, time will tell, as always. And you got a lot of time, because despite being a smash hit, for some reason they've taken a hiatus of over a year. You have to wait till 2020 in the fall for a new Doctor Who. So anyway, but so far the continuity pretty much holds as it is. Sadly, the same cannot be said for Star Trek. After the J.J. Abrams Star Trek films were set in an alternative timeline, which just by doing that, it actually has more respect for the original continuity, because it just says, hey, we're an alternate universe, so it doesn't matter what we do. After those films happened, and the first one I think was good, the rest, no. Into Darkness is just awful. And for the most part, people are unhappy about them, and I think they're done. But anyway, Star Trek belongs on television, and so CBS All Access introduced Star Trek Discovery as a prequel series set 10 years before the time of Captain Kirk of the Prime Universe. This would be the original series. This was fully advertised as being in the original Prime Universe, so it's not like they just sort of half-assed mentioned it or something. No. This was the jumping off point, the advertisement for it, and that's key to this. Even before the show debuted, promo images that were released revealed that the series bore no resemblance whatsoever to the original Prime Universe timeline. Worse yet, the background of Spock was needlessly toyed with by introducing a human stepsister that had never been mentioned before. You know, that's a big problem with breaking the basic rules of prequels. The established story, it constrains you, and you've got to acknowledge that, and otherwise don't do it at all. Should have set the whole thing in the future, but they went with prequel. Spock had never mentioned her, Sarek never mentioned her, and not even Amanda. I mean, you could argue that Spock and Sarek as Vulcans just don't talk about that sort of thing, but not Amanda. No, she would have said something about it. And don't talk to me about Cybok in Star Trek V. Pointing to previous mistakes and crap doesn't correct or defend current crap and mistakes. So it's kind of the same situation, but no, it doesn't clear up what STD has done. But the rest of the season just trashes continuity over and over. The technology was just too far advanced for its time. You know, the uniforms and everything were all wrong, the look of it, the ship and all that. The entire race of the Klingons were just desecrated. It's just, come on, you didn't even try. Harry Mudd has a time machine, for God's sakes, before the Federation even knew time travel was possible. That was one of the elements of the original series. And then, of course, the Mirror Universe, they discover it here before it was originally discovered by Kirk. So now it's like somehow, well, they just forgot to tell the Enterprise that, yeah, there's a parallel universe where everything's backwards and evil. You might run into that. Oh, he did, yeah. So, yeah, very foolish. The show was just clearly produced by people who didn't care about Star Trek at all. You know, maybe they wanted to do their own sci-fi series, but lacked confidence in their abilities to do so. So they, you just slap that established Star Trek brand on it. I can understand why they might have lacked confidence in their abilities because, well, Star Trek Discovery only produced 2 notable episodes. One was sort of like a Star Trek episode, the one where Saru Doug Jones' character goes crazy, and one that was an interesting character study of Captain Lorca, and that was it. That's a lot of trouble and expense because the special effects, they spent a lot of money on sets and special effects, and the special effects are gorgeous. Probably, just based on that, the best looking sci-fi series ever. But it's all icing and no cake. But anyway, if you thought all that destruction of Star Trek continuity was bad, it's probably going to get worse because they got their another season coming, and it looks as if in the second season Spock will be further destroyed. When you tear down classic characters in order to build up your new characters, you're insulting your new characters. You're saying they aren't good enough to stand on their own, which of course speaks to one's inability to write good characters. There are many sins from Star Trek Discovery, attacking fans as bigots, and it's stealing their main plot from a video game. Jeez, that's a whole other video on its own. But the most destructive was, of course, its utter disrespect and disregard for Star Trek's continuity, while at the same time using that to promote the show. So, they lied. Ugh. So, Doctor Who wins. Something positive for Doctor Who, as it hasn't been nearly as destructive to its continuity as Star Trek Discovery has. But, again, time will tell. But hopefully not. Then there's Star Wars, but that's another story, and by now, I'm sure you've already heard it. Thank you for watching and listening. Say, while you're here, why not like and subscribe? And hey, check out the link description below. That'll take you to my many stores that have plenty of goodies for you.